Hello! This presentation analysis of the novel Moby Dick is purely my own interpretation and should be looked at as such. To begin, I would like to provide a brief synopsis of the text. We are introduced to Ishmael, the narrator, at the start of the book. He follows the story of the mad one-legged Captain Ahab who was on a quest to vanquish the great white whale, Moby Dick. As it turns out, Moby Dick was the one who took Captain Ahab's leg previous to the events of the book. As the captain's ship, the Pequod, journeys the ocean in search of the whale, Ishmael provides readers with informational and speculative chapters about whales and whaling generally. In the end, Ahab finds Moby Dick and dies in his attempts to kill the creature. From this book, I took away two major themes, the first being devotion. From Ishmael forming a lasting relationship with a harpooner of the Pequod called Queequeg, to Ahab committing his life to find the white whale, the theme of devotion is strung intricately throughout the story, even so to the point where Ahab becomes obsessively devoted to his quest of vengeance. But we'll get to that later on. At the start of the book, when the story is more centralized around Ishmael, readers witness the narrator develop a bond with the soon-to-be harpooner of the Pequod, or savage, as Ishmael first labeled him, Queequeg. You will find on page 81 in Chapter 7 of Moby Dick that after having to sleep in the same bed with each other in a pack-jammed inn, these two commit to one another as bosom friends with the intimate act of forehead-pressing. And I quote, "He, Queequeg, seemed to take to me as quite as naturally and unbiddenly as I to him, and when our smoke was over, he pressed his forehead against mine, clasped me round the waist, and said that henceforth we were married, meaning, in his country's phrase, that we were bosom friends. He would gladly die for me if need should be." End quote. By setting up these two characters' devotion to one another, we see the author foreshadowing to the theme of devotion, specifically speaking of Ahab's devotion to finding the monstrous whale. As a matter of fact, throughout the entire journey on the Pequod, Ahab stays up into all hours of nights to mark nautical charts and maps in order to sail the most optimal and accurate routes on his journey to find Moby Dick. And I quote page 241 in chapter 44 of Moby Dick. "But it was not this night in particular that, in the solitude of his cabin, Ahab thus pondered over his charts. Almost every night they were brought out. Almost every night some pencil marks were effaced and others were substituted. For with the charts of all four oceans before him, Ahab was threading a maze of currents and eddies, with a view to the more certain accomplishment of that monomaniac thought of his soul." End quote. Ishmael and Queequeg and Captain Ahab continue to showcase the theme of devotion in likewise ways throughout the rest of the book. The second major theme I observed in Moby Dick is foresight. From the foreshadowing of Ahab to the foreshadowing of Moby Dick himself, the author uses this theme to heighten anticipation and/or apprehension of coming events. For example, before Ishmael or any other sailor of the Pequod saw Ahab in person, certain talk went round about him, rumors of his peg leg, and of the whale he had high hopes in capturing, and, of course, his sanity. In fact, even before Ishmael boarded the ship, a strange man called Elijah, which is also the name of a prophet in the Bible who prophesied about King Ahab's bad deeds, warned Ishmael and Queequeg off about the mad Captain Ahab. On page 125 in chapter 19 of Moby Dick, after conversing with the quote-unquote prophet for a bit, Ishmael decides that this man must be mad, and I quote, "My friend," said I, "what all this gibberish of yours is about, I don't know, and I don't much care, for it seems to me that you must be a little damaged in the head." End quote. But later on in the book, when sailors have asked Ahab about all the rumors, Ahab confirms them all, and thereby admits to everyone that he was truly mad. And I quote Ahab on page 208 in chapter 37 of Moby Dick. "They think me mad, Starbuck does, but I'm demoniac. I am madness madden, that wild madness that's only calm to comprehend itself. The prophecy was that I should be dismembered, and I lost this leg. I now prophesy that I will dismember my dismemberer. Now then, but the prophet and the fulfiller on." End quote. I'd like to remind you that throughout the novel, Ishmael gives informational and speculative chapters about whales and whaling in general. He also puts together theories that he himself has thought up about whales. These chapters can also be seen as a form of the foresight theme. For example, in chapter 45 of Moby Dick, Ishmael comes to the conclusion that a sea monster from a tale or legend of the past must be a whale. He provides plenty of explanation for this conclusion, and on page 255 of this chapter, he states, and I quote, "If, then, you properly put these statements together and reason upon them a bit, you will clearly perceive that, according to all human reasoning, Procopius' sea monster that for half a century stove the ships of a Roman emperor emperor, must in all probability have been a sperm whale." End quote. In another chapter, Ishmael explains that there is no way to finding out what the whale truly looks like unless you go whaling yourself. On page 315 to 316 in chapter 55 of Moby Dick, Ishmael goes on to say, and I quote, "So there is no earthly way of finding out precisely what the whale really looks like, and the only mode in which you can derive even a tolerable idea of his living contour is by going a whaling yourself. But by doing so, you run no small risk of being internally stove and sunk by him. Wherefore, it seems to me that you had best not be too fastidious in your curiosity touching this Leviathan." End quote. On page 361 in chapter 68 of Moby Dick, Ishmael expresses how whales are essentially impenetrable because of their thick skins. Quite literally speaking, actually. And in chapter 82 of Moby Dick, Ishmael attempts to persuade me that dragons, mythical creatures known for breathing fire and destroying towns and cities and stealing princesses and all that, are really whales, and whales are dragons. On page 423 of this chapter, he says, and I quote, "Bearing all this in mind, it will not appear altogether incompatible with the sacred legend and the ancient drafts of the scene, to hold this so-called dragon no other than the great Leviathan himself." End quote. It was from chapters like these that a growing apprehension of the final showdown of Ahab and Moby Dick was developed in the hearts of readers. At least in my heart, this being my interpretation of the book. Now I would like to analyze Captain Ahab in more detail. And it is now that I would also like to introduce to you a third theme, man versus nature. Ahab was a charismatic captain whose overconfidence led him to defy all common sense and reason. He believed that he was impervious to the forces of nature, and that he would remain so, like a god. And I quote Captain Ahab on page 572 in chapter 117 in Moby Dick. "I have here 2 pledges that I shall yet slay Moby Dick and survive it." "Take another pledge, old man," said the Parsee, as his eyes lighted up like fireflies in the gloom. "Hemp only can kill thee." "The gallows, you mean? I am immortal, then. On land and on sea," cried Ahab, with a laugh of derision. "Immortal on land and on sea." End quote. His delusions are what made him quote-unquote mad, and this is what caused him to plot his vengeful quest, challenging the white whale, challenging nature. Something that coincided with his delusion, going against him in his pursuit of the whale, was his personification of Moby Dick. He saw the whale as an intelligent being with evil intents. It can be observed here that Ahab and the whale are presented as literary foils. It is likely that Ahab is personifying the whale subconsciously to provide himself with a worthy opponent. However, by doing so, he is caught in this dichotomy of deeming the whale as the quote-unquote smart one and he himself being the dumb one, because of the imminent defeat that he will encounter. Ahab knows that he is no match for the whale, but, blinded by his ego, he wants to be beaten by the best. This is why, at the cost of his own life and sanity, he personifies Moby Dick as an intelligent being. I believe these delusions came about with Ahab's first encounter with the whale. Moby Dick took the captain's leg, and one could say his sanity. The physical damage Ahab took away also a rationality of his mind, I think, replacing it with fallacy, causing him this madness, causing him to see villainous intellect in the beast Moby Dick. If Ahab had yet any last ounce of rationality in him, perhaps it would be easy for him to recognize that Moby Dick is simply an animal doing what it can to remain alive, as any other beast of nature would do. If he could not see that, perhaps he could still find enough rationality in him to approach killing the whale with more caution. Even bringing a fleet of whaling ships would be wiser, and could surely take down that wild beast. And it's not although Ahab was not presented with opportunities to either abandon his quest, or at least approach it more rationally. Ship captains from ships that the Pequod passed even expressed their concerns about the white whale, insisting it was not a beast to be trifled with. Captain Ahab's own crew told him that this journey was ill-fated. And I quote page 583 in chapter 119 of Moby Dick. Starbuck grasped Ahab by the arm. God is against thee, old man. Forbear! 'Tis an ill voyage, ill begun, ill continued. Let me square the yards while we may, old man, and make a fair wind of it homeward, to go on a better voyage than this. End quote. Lastly, I would like to discuss how Moby Dick has shaped our world today. This book is about a man pursuing the unpursuable and never giving up. He does not succeed in fulfilling his dreams in the end, which is what makes this a cautionary tale. It is stories like this that have propelled and encouraged reckless behavior as we see all over the internet today, be it challenging yourself to do insane things or making temerarious decisions. For example, the Cinnamon Challenge, a YouTube dare, basically, that started in the early 2000s, challenged people to eat a spoonful of ground cinnamon in under 60 seconds without drinking anything. As you can imagine, a lot of people failed this challenge because of the fact that ground cinnamon, a powder, is not meant to be eaten like that. Not to mention that inhaling the wrong way ends in a cinnamon puff cloud exploding out of one's mouth. There are other more explicit dangers to this challenge, but without getting into them, I can safely conclude that that was a legitimately stupid challenge. Like Ahab's pursuit of the whale Moby Dick, one might observe. And I'm not saying people need to have read Moby Dick to be influenced by it. I took a recent survey asking students in my class about the book Moby Dick, and 100% of the surveyed students said that they had at least heard of Moby Dick. And although 80% of the students hadn't read it and didn't know any general themes or takeaways from the book, it's not difficult to see how this book has affected society. Even things like going rock climbing, or skydiving, or volcano surfing, or hang gliding all allude to what Moby Dick has inspired in society. Determination, pursuing the unpursuable, never giving up on your dreams, and so on. Moby Dick can also be connected to the modern world in more obvious ways. For example, this book has inspired over 20 film adaptations, including The Sea Beast, 1926, Moby Dick, 1930, Moby Dick, 2010, Age of Dragons, 2011, and In the Heart of the Sea, 2015. And the book is moreover casually referenced in pop culture and other media. And to this day, Moby Dick continues to inspire not giving up on your dreams and pursuing them with caution. And there you have it. This has been my interpretation of the novel Moby Dick. And one last thing. I picked up a few different quotes from the book that I thought sounded nice. So if you're interested, I will display them on the screen, and you can pause the video to read them if you'd like. Thank you for listening, and have a lovely day.